Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First thing I'm going to do is to pass it over to the Democratic Officer, Damien Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. The first item on the agenda is the appointment of Chairman. Mrs. Fryer was nominated Chairman-elect at the County Council meeting held on 18th of May 2022. Could I please ask the committee to confirm this is agreed? To be formally nominated.
Yeah, and I'd like to nominate Mrs. Fryer.
Lovely. And a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you. I'll pass over to Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much. And this meeting is being broadcast live via the Council's website, and it will be available after the meeting. We now have item 2. Can you, oh, by the way, can you all make sure that your microphones are mute until you wish or are invited to speak? And I have apologies from Mr. Hatchin Nicolau and Caroline Lewis. We also welcome Mr. Hunt to the committee, and I would now like to ask the election of the Deputy Chairman, and I propose Mr. Smith.
And I will second Councillor Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we now move to item 3. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of March are taken as read, confirmed and signed. And is everybody in agreement? I, unfortunately, was not at that meeting. Well, unfortunately for you, fortunately for me, I was out of the country for that meeting. So Mr. Smith took that meeting and he will be signing them. Is everybody in agreement that it's a true record? Agreed. Thank you. Item 4 is question time. I've received a question from Mrs. Sue Whiting, who is present at the meeting. Would you like to come to the table, Mrs. Whiting? The question and its response have been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of this meeting and will be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on this meeting. Mrs. Whiting, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, Chair, I do. Thank you, Chair, for the answer that roadshows are being planned and for the links embedded in the answer. Could you explain which 2 focus groups with parents have been held, as there are many different groups of parents within the SEN provision, and parents' carers can belong to many different groups, depending on the needs of different children, whether with entirely specific education needs or health needs?
Would you like to answer that, Mrs. Moore, or is it Sharon? Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so both of the focus groups were open to all parents and carers. We did advertise them on the local offer Facebook page, but we also advertised them via the Parent Carer Forum, the Leicestershire Send Hub. We then created a survey as another avenue for families to share their views with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Whiting. Now you are welcome to remain with the meeting, or we quite understand if you feel necessary to. That's fine, no problem at all. Thank you. We now have item 5, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5, and we've received some questions from Mr. Hunt, who is present at the meeting. The question and responses have been circulated to members of the committee prior to this meeting, and again I'd like to remind you there is no discussion over these. Mr. Hunt, do you have a supplementary question? And I would remind you that your supplementary question should be to clarify the reply you have been given and should not raise any new issues.
No supplementary questions. Just like to say how pleased I was with a very informative response on a very important national report.
Mr. Hunt. Item 6 is the items which are to be taken as urgent, take as urgent, else that are urgent, subject not on the agenda. I've not been notified of any urgent items. No, right home, thank you. Item 7, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Does anybody have a declaration that they wish to declare? No, right, thank you very much. Item 8 is declaration to the party whip in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedures, Rule 16. Do any members have any declarations? No, no party whip. Item 9, we're going round, right, it's getting great. Presentation of petitions under Standing Order 36. There are no petitions, unless there's anyone know. Thank you. We now move on to the main agenda items. As with all following items, can I please ask members to allow officers to present their full report before asking questions? And the first item on your agenda is item 10, which is the Q4 2021-22 performance report. I will now pass to Jane Moore. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I hand over to Sharon to lead off on the report, I did just want to introduce members to Alison Bradley, who has just recently taken over as the Interim Assistant Director for Education, Send and Commissioning, and it's her first meeting as AD, wanted to introduce you to her. I'll hand over to Sharon, who's going to take you through the report, and then Alison. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Chair and members. Yes, so the report is our usual quarterly report on performance, and the report, beginning of the report outlines the background and the performance indicators. If we move on to section 8 onwards, that goes into some detail on those particular performance indicators, would want to draw your attention to that although there has been a slight decline this reported quarter against some of the performance indicators. Some of those are performance indicators that we are still performing strongly against. So for instance, the re-referrals to social care and the percentage of single assessments. So although a slight decrease this quarter that's being reported upon, we still continue to perform well as an authority against those indicators. Those that I'm sure will raise particular issues, or perhaps it would be helpful for me to provide more information upon. So in point 9, and would just like to draw your attention to, there is a typo there. It says intensive referral order. It should say independent reviewing officers, so apologies for that. So the percentage of child protection conferences reviewed within timescale has seen a decline, and that is an area that we have got a particular focus against, because that would be an issue and a concern for us. Investigations into that performance has seen that that decline in the main was against a period of time where we were experiencing some staffing issues, both within the chairs of those meetings, our business support to those meetings, and around staffing within certain social work teams. So we have looked at some detail at that on that figure, and have a good understanding of what what was the cause of that decline, and I'm pleased to report that in relation to the staffing in those 3 key areas, we've worked hard to ensure that for independent reviewing officers, for the business support, we are now back to strength. We do still have challenges around social work vacancies, but we have, I can report, been able to appoint agency workers to where we've got some particular gaps. So it is an area that SMT, the senior management team, have got a strong hold over. Percentage of children subject to a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time, as committee knows, has been a focus for the service for some time. We continue to audit against that indicator. We are confident that these are children that are not quickly returning for a second or subsequent period of child protection planning. They are children in the main who have been without a child protection concern and plan for some time. Between the 2 periods of planning. They remain primarily children of families where domestic abuse, parental mental health and parental substance misuse are an issue. We've continued to develop as a service for some time the work around domestic abuse, including a domestic abuse toolkit to support our work with this group of children and families. And we have a focus in our second phase of defining services for the future around mental health, parental mental health and substance misuse. But that does remain an area for us. It is an area nationally that most authorities have struggled with, have seen a decline in performance during the last 2 years. There are a number of reasons for that, including children, vulnerable children who have been in families that have perhaps for periods of time not had the same external support available to them due to the pandemic. So, but we do keep a close eye on that. Then we move on to section 14 onwards, takes you through the performance for our care levers, where we remain performing very strongly against. We have identified the issue of dental checks for our children in care. And although nationally we know there is an issue around access to dentists or for national health dentists, that is a focused area of work that we are focusing on with colleagues within the health service, and it has been presented to our corporate parenting board that is chaired by our lead member and our young people. So it's an area of focus for us. Children and family wellbeing are those slight decline in numbers of families worked with this quarter. We have, during the whole of the pandemic, seen a substantial increase in the number of families that the service supports, and that's continued to happen in the quarter being reported upon. And the stats around our youth offending and youth justice service and rates of re-offending remain fairly positive, fairly low numbers, as do young people in custody. So I'll pass over to Alison to confirm whether there is anything further she would like to highlight from early years or education.
Thank you, Sharon. I'd like to draw your attention to points 21 and 22, which are in the main related to young people with an education and healthcare plan. And you'll see in there that there has been an increase, and there's also been an increase in those with SEND needs, but without an education and healthcare plan, having a SEND support in place. Just a little bit of an explanation around that. Part of that is about better identification of need within the school settings and in the early years settings as well. But also it's about parents' kind of expectation about wanting to get the right support at the right time in the right place for their children as well. Moving on to points 27, which is about every child getting the best start in life. So points 27 through to 29 are about fee in there, and the fee census is taken on a termly basis, and this report for Q4 includes the spring 22 data. So during spring 22, the percentage of eligible 3-year-olds taking up the fee, you can see in there is 93.9%, which is a decrease in the previous term. And then the percentage of eligible 2-year-olds is 76.5, and which has declined on the autumn term. And the eligibility for the 2-year-olds is more targeted towards the disadvantaged families. Hence, there's a smaller number of children that are in that 2-year-old sort of cohort on there. We do tend to get those fluctuations that happen, and we are putting further sort of work to look through the service to see why we're getting those changes and fluctuations around the fee uptake through there. In the spring term, the percentage of 2- and 3-year-olds accessing their fee in good or outstanding settings is 95.1%, which is a slight decline from the autumn term. Again, there's work taking place around that. Some of the factors could be related to the return of the inspections coming through to our different settings, etc. If we're going to move you on to points 31 through to 37, and the first points 31 and 32 are about the percentage of primary schools rated good or outstanding, which is pretty much remaining similar to Q3, and the percentage of secondary schools remaining good and outstanding, which again is pretty much remaining quite similar to the previous quarter update. Point 33 is relating to elective home education, and you can see that at the end of Q4 there has been an increase. This is also an increase of 59 students, the comparison to the end of Q4. So we have got that general trend of elective home education population growing. This is something that's seen across the country nationally, and we're sort of more or less in line with that. The trend of that cohort is monitored quite closely, and we're just trying to see whether there is anything in particular that is highlighting those increasing trends. But we have got quite close scrutiny on those who are electively home educated. You can see on the final point there on point 37 that the NEET figures have started to reduce, which is also a good kind of point to raise there. And again, we do get that fluctuation with our NEET figures from the spring term to the autumn term, where young people have made different decisions in the autumn term, and then we sort of track them again in the spring term and get at that better decline, which is a good decline that we need to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and you're very welcome to join us. It's nice to see you. Right, I'll now open it up to discussion. If I see anybody that would like to raise anything. Oh, well, yes, Mr. North. Oh, sorry, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to look at point 9 that we got a discussion around 86.3% of child protection cases being seen within the time frame. I'd look at child protection. I believe it's children that are suffering significant harm or are likely to suffer significant harm. It's great to hear that things have improved slightly with staffing, but I suppose because these are the most vulnerable children that we look after and we are in the 4th quartile, what are we doing to ensure that we maintain the staffing levels? What things are we doing to ensure retention? Because obviously dropping down to this, that 1 in 8 children isn't being seen in the time frame is obviously for the level of vulnerability is concerning. And second question, point 21, the educational health and care plans. Obviously, with the increase in educational health and care plans, I'm sure that's bringing a lot of pressures onto SENA. The more they are, obviously, the more they have to deal with. As a parent governor of a school that deals with transitions a lot, I'm getting a lot of reports and discussion about children that are transitioning into the next placements. I believe that the SEND regulations say that they have to be done by the 15th of February. I'm just wondering if the transitions have been done by the 15th of February, and if not, how many are still outstanding today? If you don't have the figure right now, could you provide it at a later date to the committee, because a lot of parents are reporting that transitions and getting the right school places for children with an educational health and care plan is an increasingly difficult thing. Thank you.
Thank you. If I take point 9 first. So apologies if I wasn't clear about that. This is not about visits to children on a child protection plan. These children have been visited and seen by a social worker. This is where we review a case. So when a child's on a plan at set intervals, following the first meeting at 3 months after the first going on a plan, and then every 6 months, we would come together with an independent chair of all the agencies to review the progress of the plan. So the visits to our children on child protection plans are taking place, and the 6 weekly core groups of the key people working with that child and family are all taking place. The delay, the slight drop, was around that formal meeting that was reviewing. So still very, very important, and still something that we are focusing on ensuring, because we've always performed really highly against that. But I'd want to reassure the committee that this is not the number of visits children are being seen, and we review those figures of children being seen at the senior management team on a monthly basis, so we keep a tight hold on those visits to children. For the second part of your question, we have a really detailed recruitment and retention strategy. We know, and committee will be aware, that nationally and regionally there is both work, but there is a problem around the recruitment of qualified social workers and retention of social workers. We, as part of our policy and strategy, work really hard to look at different ways of ensuring not only that we can recruit social workers, but we can retain them within Leicestershire. And that includes looking not only at the pay scales, but on the working environment and the number of children that they work with, and as well as being part of national and regional work around that recruitment of those staff. We've also committed as an authority to grow our own social workers. So this autumn we'll see the first group of apprentice social workers that have actually been supported on their social work training by the authority. So we're doing a lot of work around the social work staff. And in relation to business support, because obviously I talked about business support, we've reviewed that and reviewed our capacity to make sure that we can improve our performance on those review meetings. Thank you.
And if I pick up your question around paragraph 21, so yeah, we've seen an unprecedented increase in the numbers of requests coming through for education, health and care plans, particularly over this year, and what that has led to, as you've quite rightly identified, is a number of delays in us meeting the statutory timescales that are associated with the education, health and care plan system. So we know that's the case, and we do know that there are a number of transitions and transfers outstanding still. We've been undertaking some really robust work in order to get us to a place where we no longer have a kind of backlog, and that we're behind the statutory requirements, and our ambition is that we will have those cleared by the end of June, which should mean that then those children will know where they're transitioning to, and certainly schools will know as well. But we do know there's a current significant challenge in the system that is impacting on children and families in terms of knowing where they are. We're working really hard to deal with that and address that at the moment as we kind of sit here now. Thank you.
Is that all right, Mr. Martin?
Yes, thank you very much. It'd be interesting to see how many children there are backlogged at present. So if that could be given out, that'd be great. But other than that, thank you very much.
Sorry, do you want me to just add on to that, just for reassurance and taking up your point around that continual challenge that you might be getting from parents or in the school system, we have put into place regular meetings with all schools and schools grouped into localities as well, with the priority being on that backlog around phase transfer. That's the highest priority that we've put into place, because we want to make sure that children, families and schools are all clear who is going to be starting in September.
Anyone else? Mr. Hunt and then Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, when will we know that all of those pupils are dealt with?
Thank you. Yeah, so we do know the numbers. I just don't know them now off the top of my head, I'm afraid. So we do know the numbers. What we have been doing is really closely monitoring the numbers that we're dealing with. Those are scrutinised on a weekly basis by Alison as part of her leadership role. So we will be able to share with you exactly where we are in the present. Obviously, we do have that ambition to get it sorted, in particularly those transfers, by the end of June. But we are monitoring numbers, so we do know the numbers now. Just apologies, we don't know them off the top of our head, that's all, but we can share them.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Wall. I think the thing is too is that the figures that the officers will be giving us will be at that time. So by the time we read it, or actually, because it's a moving figure, isn't it? Because if they're working on clearing the backlog and we get the figure of how many are in the waiting now, and the figure comes out on Friday and we don't read it till Monday, it may change again.
I think it's a valuable exercise though, because obviously the statutory deadline is the 15th of February, and now obviously in early June.
I'm not.
So just to understand the scope of the problem.
I'm not decrying that. All I'm saying is it will be at that moment. So, you know, it could change again, and they do have the target of the end of June. And that's what they're working to. That's all I was trying to say, that if someone asks you in 2 weeks' time, the figure you're given is not the same. You follow me? Right, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, on the service as a whole, absolute admiration for all the work that's being done, and particular thanks to the Director for facilitating a visit last week to the Loughborough Early Years Centre. Saw Rachel, she took me around, and the work the people do there is fantastic. So hadn't seen this kind of report for a while, and I really understand that there are solid reasons for some of the difficulties that we're having. It would be good if that was in the report, so that the report would look a bit more positive, perhaps in some areas, you know, that these things are being tackled. I know there's a high needs development plan being developed, which we will see sometime over the current year, I dare say. Is that going to make a difference to any of the targets we've got down here, and perhaps in what direction?
Yes, so we do have a high needs development plan, and we are currently refreshing that plan at the moment. The aim of the high needs development plan is around ensuring that we have the best services for our children, and that the needs of children with SEND needs are met. So we will be, two things really. One is that we will be bringing an update on that plan to this committee in September, and we'll be able to give an overview of two things. One is the kind of progress against the plan and the work that we're doing to develop the system to support children, and the second, we will be able to give an update on where we are with the financial challenges that we have also associated with the high needs or SEND system at the moment. So we'll bring two updates as part of that report. In terms of the impact on these numbers, it may be that the plan reduces the number of educational health and care plans that we have in the system, because as part of the work we're able to meet children's needs without an EHCP. So they could well influence it. However, we will obviously will be continuing to report on the number of educational health and care plan issued, but also we will continue to be able to report on the timeliness of issuing those plans as well. So I think what you'll receive in September is a kind of broader view of the wider impact of the work that we want to do, and how that is being of benefit to the children with special educational needs in the system.
Thank you. I see no more questions, comments, but no, thank you very much, and thank you as always to the team. I know it's extremely hard work for you at the moment, one way and another, but thank you very much indeed. With that, we'll move on to item 11, which is the report on the impact of COVID-19, and I think you're starting off, Jane.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did just want to briefly introduce the report. I know we've brought this report to members previously to share with you the impact that COVID's had on children and young people across Leicestershire. Just by way of introduction, I did want to say thank you to the staff within the department. I think for many, many people, this has been a really trying time, and supporting and continuing to deliver services in the way that they've done, I think is exceptional, and I'm particularly proud of the work that's gone on across the department. But I also want to recognise the hard work for our children as well. I think this has been a really difficult time for children, and really recognise the impact the pandemic's had on them. And whilst we've pulled out some of that in the report, I think a real well done to children across Leicestershire, because it's not been easy times, and they've come through it with strength and resilience. So I'll hand over to Sharon, who will take us through the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Chair. So the report before you, we've tried to detail and section some of the key performance indicators that evidence the work and will hopefully give reassurance of the work that's been done during the pandemic. We've talked about the evidence against our most vulnerable children and their families, so those children who are supported by children's social care, the impact on targeted early help, then schools, and then workforce and recovery planning. So they are all interconnected, but we've tried to pull out some of the key learning and some of the key activity during this time. So background to the report that I won't go into great detail on. People know about the pandemic, they know the circumstances around that we've been delivering and providing services and children and families have been living with over the last 2 years. Section 5 of the report takes you through some of the key activity that happened from very quickly going down into the first period of lockdown, the practical things that we needed to put in place to ensure that our staff could continue to deliver services to children, the activity that we put in place to make sure that our most vulnerable children and their families were seen and provided with a service, and the work and the very detailed work that went on with colleagues both within schools and health settings to ensure that children were seen. Paragraph 6 of the report takes you through and provides the detail of sort of while we were in the eye of the pandemic, it was sometimes difficult for us to be able to share or be able to analyse the actual data and what was happening. What we can now say is when we've tracked the impact pre-COVID, sort of March 2020 to this period now where we are living with COVID, we are able to see from the data the referrals, the contacts into the department, and those children seen to be requiring a service from children's social care, and also those children that require a service from targeted early help, so our children and family wellbeing services. So paragraph 7, and there is a table at the end of paragraph 6 that gives you more of the detail around those figures and those sources of our contacts. And as always, our three, not surprisingly, our three key areas of source of referrals are the police, education and health. So analysis of the data shows that while there's been some fluctuation in contact during the period, there has been a slight increase. So we are seeing that we are having requests, demands appropriately for more services for children. And that's not a surprise. You know, children have gone through periods, some of our most vulnerable children have gone through periods of real pressure on families not in the initial phases of the lockdown, not receiving the same network support from their community and extended family members. So it's not surprising that we have seen over the 2-year period that increase in contacts, in referrals, and the complexity of what some of our children are struggling with. And the increase, although a slight decrease at the start of the pandemic that we reported previously around targeted early help, as schools have as more children have returned into school settings and other settings, that request for families and children to receive support from our children and family wellbeing service has increased significantly over the period. We saw an increase in the number of children subject to child protection plans, again, initially in the early part of the pandemic. That was, I think, a cause of a few factors. One, with the pressures that I've already outlined that children and families were in, and for some of those most vulnerable children, that led to going over the bar, really, of what would be child protection concerns. But also, during that period, we saw professionals perhaps being more hesitant about managing risks for families. We had periods of time where health colleagues weren't visiting children in the same way. People were working remotely. So professionals were more anxious and probably more cautious about children's plans stepping down from child protection. So we did see an increase and saw a real increase around the August of that first period of the pandemic. Those figures began to come down to a more realistic number, but we have seen a slight increase again over more recent months. Impact on service delivery. So the services have continued to be delivered throughout the pandemic. Jane has already expressed thanks to staff. I think we cannot thank our workforce enough for how they have continued to work in very difficult circumstances, often struggling with things that are happening in their own lives, to actually prioritise services to children and families and continue to use very inventive ways initially, get used to IT and a more use of IT in maintaining that contact with children and families. And actually, right from the start, our most vulnerable children were still receiving face-to-face visits. So when the majority of society were being told not to visit, our staff, with PPE and with support, were actually putting themselves out there and making sure that children were seen. And I have to say, a workforce to be really proud of, because people have really mustered behind this and, you know, needing to see children, focus on the work, share some really good practice. And in the main, despite the areas that we described earlier that were focused on around performance, generally have continued not only to deliver a service, but continue to make progress against our continuous improvement plan. The report then from section 17, paragraph 17, sorry, onwards, talks about that very our responsibilities to our children in care, how we have maintained the service, making sure that our children are seen, special mention for our fabulous carers who have supported our children through this time, and testament to their work and the work of the service. We didn't experience in Leicestershire, as some parts of the country did, a real breakdown in placements when families were under such pressure and children weren't having access to, there were no safety valves of other places that people could go. So we're really proud of the how we've been able to maintain the care for our children during this time. The report talks about some of the things we did around that, some of the practical things we did around visits, around laptops, around providing some virtual activities and art classes, and Leicestershire's Got Talent, and things that really engaged our children and their imagination during this this period of time. Contact was a particular challenge because it was so important that our children were able to see when it was safe to do so, continue to see their families and significant people, but we were managing anxiety of carers if children were going into other households, and those staff who were supervising contact. So we looked at a variety of ways to them to maintain contact, and including making sure, as it was safe to do, that was face to face. We provided very positively and very quickly a resource so for unaccompanied asylum seeking children who arrived in Leicestershire, that we had a safe place where they could quarantine and we could support them appropriately as children, whilst we safely looked at places and placements for them to go to. Our corporate parenting team and participation workers supported our social workers and other key staff in making sure that children were seen, and we ensured that our care leavers, who we identified very quickly as being potentially a very vulnerable group, because they don't all have those networks and strong networks outside of our support, making sure that they were seen, and we had more regular contact. So our children in care, our children subject to child protection, our care leavers in those initial stages were contacted on a weekly basis, even if ordinarily their plan may be that they were seen fortnightly, or for some of our children in care, at less longer intervals as part of their plan. We were actually upping our contact with all of them. Section up to section 35 takes you through some of those, 36, sorry, takes you through some of that activity. Paragraph 37 talks about the service improvement activity. So as I said earlier, really proud that we haven't just kept things going and our staff haven't just kept services going. They've actually continued to improve the service and ensure that we have kept a clear focus on our improvement journey, and I think, as you'll recall, when we fed back at the last committee on the outcome of our focused Ofsted visit, we were particularly proud that the good work of the service was acknowledged by Ofsted in their focus visit. So monthly performance meetings have continued to really focus in on practice and what's happened for children. We completed in that first 12 months COVID 19 risk assessments on all our children, making sure that we were risk assessing their circumstances, but also risk assessing staff, the risk to staff of visiting, and making sure that PPE and other things were available. We launched our Think Practice, which is a learning brief that electronically comes out to all staff, that keeps staff really focused and up to date on some of the key learning and some of the practice development areas. We continue to embed our writing to the child, and have received very positive feedback on how children view that and how that's seen by external inspectors. We developed very quickly online virtual training, and we continued our work around defining children's services for the future. A real focus as well on well-being of staff, and making sure that we were looking at different ways of supporting staff and supporting their well-being during this time. And in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion, we have worked on and developed the We Care strategy. Paragraph 38 onwards takes you through the fostering service, some of the things that I've already mentioned about how we've supported our children via some really good foster carers who've gone above and beyond during this period. We have done a lot of things as a service, not only the ongoing support that we ordinarily give them, but we made sure, so thank you hampers went out, Christmas cakes went out at Christmas, letters have gone out from Jane and I, video messages have gone out from us, every possible way that we've been able to support our carers. And I can report that 2 weeks ago we had our first face-to-face foster carers award evening from before the pandemic, and carers were buzzing and really talking about the support that they've received from the service. We have, as other authorities, seen some difficulties in continuing to recruit the numbers of new foster carers that we need for a variety of reasons. Families that would ordinarily, or individuals that ordinarily come forward to be assessed as foster carers were having other things that were happening in their lives. But that said, we have still seen and can report that we've grown our number of carers, and we've actually seen people coming through. So that has been really, really positive. I think it's fair to say that all parts of the education sector were deeply impacted upon by COVID. We know of the impact for our children right from that first 1001 days, early years support, and right the way through school, that our children need to have that access to good quality education, and they have struggled and are struggling through some of the things that they've experienced at home, not being able to see their friends as much, not having that face-to-face contact. But what is really positive is that the schools and the local authority really galvanised working together, making sure we could identify all our vulnerable children in schools, those children that are known to the service, and that we had a very clear system in place from early days that would enable the school to, or schools to, inform the local authority if a child that was felt to be vulnerable wasn't attending school, and we could make sure that they were children, if we were visiting and needed to see them, or needed to encourage them and their families to get them into school. So that although real challenges, worked particularly well. And as said earlier, workforce have been fantastic during this period. We have seen some periods of significant staff absence. surprisingly, that wasn't in the early stages of the pandemic, while some staff were ill and some staff were seriously affected or had bereavements from close relatives, their close relatives in those early periods. We have never been in a position where we've not been able to continue to deliver the service. We did see probably about 6 months ago, we hit a period where we did have a significant number of staff that more people seemed to be suffering with COVID, but during the whole of that period, no part of the service wasn't able to function and provide support to children. So that is really really positive. And I think as we've moved into our recovery stage, and recovery is always a strange word because we never stopped doing what we needed to do, but we've really focused on the new ways of working. We've looked at what we've learned from the pandemic. We've looked at the positives that we got that IT and some of the virtual contacts and ways of working from home, working in an hybrid model have given to us. And I guess because we had to embrace some of those things very quickly and we had no choice, we've actually seen some of the benefit of that. So we're really focusing on how we utilise some of that learning as we go forward. So I think in summary, COVID has brought real challenges to the service. I think the report hopefully outlines for you the key achievements and some of the things that we have struggled with. I think we can be very proud of how we've maintained the services for vulnerable children and how staff have adapted to new ways of working. I think it's fair to say that the effects of the pandemic and the last 2 years on our children and their mental health and emotional well-being has been impacted. We are seeing not necessarily increased numbers of children requiring services, although it has gone up slightly, but actually the complexity that some of those children and the challenges for some of our children are actually far more complex now than they were before. And the workforce is we're having to make sure that we collectively are providing the right services to those children. So our priority is to continue to work in that new ways of working, to make sure that we don't lose what we've learned from the pandemic, making sure that we're placing ourselves in the strongest position possible as we move forward. So I hope that gives an overview of the report, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure on behalf of all of the committee here, we please pass on to all of your staff and the whole department, because they have really gone beyond what we ever expected, I think, well, certainly as councillors. And I think if we could hand out the medals, we would, but no, it's been amazing leadership. But you've also had the workforce that's got behind you. So please pass on our thanks. And I think everybody would agree with that. Thank you. Now, is there any questions, comments? Yes, Mark.
Thank you. And indeed, Chair, I echo exactly what you said. It was exceptionally challenging times, and I think you've done a sterling job. Just anecdotally, really, we were talking about the foster caring provision that we have in the county. I was just wondering, really, has the Homes for the Ukraines had any impact on that you know of? Perhaps we're not at a stage where there's sufficient amount of data that can be gathered to actually do any analysis on that, but are we noticing that people are more resilient about coming forward now because they are being asked to take on other responsibilities like the Ukrainian situation? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so we've not seen We've seen a decline or a challenge around people coming forward to foster during COVID. We've not experienced in the last few months a decline that we think is around people putting themselves forward to provide homes for Ukrainians. We have pleasingly received some calls into the council where people are wanting to provide homes to Ukrainians, and they've come through to fostering because they've not been sure who to go to, and we've made sure that we've linked them into appropriate provision. But they are very different schemes and they are very different things. So if somebody who really wanted to foster put themselves forward for the other scheme, I think as we were talking it through with individuals, they would soon find which avenue they really wanted to go down. But it's something that we're keeping an eye on. It's something that we're very mindful of. Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes, thanks, Sharon. Are there any long-lasting effects that we've seen in some of our children, as in, you know, very serious ones that we need to worry about?
Not talking about individual children, but talking about, I guess, generally around themes. We are seeing, we have seen in recent months an increase in a request for older youngsters to come into care, with a combination of families struggling, challenging relationships, causing breakdown for children. We have seen and know that some of our children have more complex mental health issues. And one of the things that we are keeping a close eye on is that we know that certain other services haven't been as available to children. So some of the key health services haven't been as available. So we're monitoring whether that is leading to more complexities for children later. But yeah. It's we are seeing children with more challenges. Yeah.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Just echo everybody else's sentiment of great thanks for everything you did, specifically the forward-facing social workers that were going into people's homes. I'm sure that would have been really challenging at the time. Just to points 42 and 43, the widening gaps for disadvantaged children. So two parts. The first part is what we're doing for the disadvantaged children to sort of regain that gap and sort of improve, you know, their attainment. And then secondly, point 43, really appreciate it that the report states the increased levels of anxiety. We've acknowledged that greater mental health concerns, health wasn't quite as available, as has been said. What are we doing for the children with educational health and care plans to sort of address their mental health issues and increased anxieties? And specifically on that, how are we making the education, health and care plan document more holistic? I think one of the key things, two of the sections are social care and health input. How are we working to improve them two sections to understand that in a post-pandemic world, a more holistic approach to education and educational health and care plans would really benefit our children? Thank you.
Taking up the first point there about the gap in attainment throughout the whole of the COVID period that Sharon's just talked through our Leicestershire Education Excellence Partnership, formerly or less familiarly called LEAP, we did engage with all partners, school sector, early years sector, governance as well of schools, to have LEAP priorities, and one of them was about the disadvantaged groups of children. So consistently throughout that COVID period, we did meet and not only just meet, had action. So it was identified that gap in the opportunities for those young children who have those kind of like learning requirements, I think is probably a better way to say that. That was put as a priority, and that's remained a focus as we've moved through the COVID stages into the recovery stages. And on the back of what Sharon was saying, and in acknowledgement of Mr. Welsh's comment there, we are seeing some children coming through the school system. It's hard to actually validate, is that to do purely with COVID, but we are seeing a lot of anxious children coming in. So that emphasis is around, is it that a child has missed out due to COVID and needs that kind of booster involvement into that, to their learning, so that eyesight is into that area of work. So there's not a specific programme, but it was picked up as a priority right from the beginning to move through. And in terms of the education and healthcare plans, again, when Sharon was mentioning that health involvement there, I've been in meetings earlier today working with health colleagues, and I think we need to put our kind of like emphasis on remembering that the health services per se were used in prioritising their work to respond to COVID, and therefore their delay in working with some of the children to be as responsive as they would have been out of COVID times to put the right assessment in place in terms of the health need has had some impact on some individual plans, and that is being worked through with our health colleagues. In terms of having that more holistic approach, while we've been moving through the COVID period, we've been looking at our education and healthcare plans, putting some quality assurance processes into those, rewriting the way in which the education and healthcare plans are pulled together. And that's been a collaborative process with Parent Carer Forum in different iterations to kind of work through that through the Send and Inclusion board that we have. But to put that QA process to say, is it addressing all those holistic needs that you're speaking about? Are the objectives that are being written into the plans, are they being pulled through into the education? So if a health requirement is being put in there, is it written as an outcome and an objective form? So we're not fully formed in that, but we have put a much more stringent QA process into the system.
Right, has anybody else got Mr. Hunt?
Yes, thanks very much for this report. I've been looking forward to it. Whether you believe that the virus is going to return in whatever form or not, that risk is there. And I wondered how much work has been done to plug the gaps that, I mean, I'm thinking particularly of the gap between the children who, in education, who had IT at home and those who didn't, a huge disadvantage to the latter. Have we made any strides towards addressing those should the virus or a virus return? That's a risk.
Yeah, I think two parts to this answer really. One is we know that throughout the pandemic there was different levels of disadvantage on so many levels. IT was one of them. What we know is that schools are working really, really hard to understand the impact of the pandemic on each and every individual child, and are working really hard to kind of bring children either back to the levels they should be, or indeed supporting. There are a number of programmes that are run and are still running actually in schools to support children to catch up in a number of different ways. So some targeted classes around areas where they've identified individual children haven't done as well. I think the second part of the question relates to potentially some of the learning should this happen again, and should we enter into another global pandemic. I think one of the things that I took great confidence from in our delivery of services through the pandemic was the speed at which the department and staff in the department were able to move their services into a very different way of delivery to support children. And I think that's the bit that Sharon referred to in her report around thinking about how we could engage with children that we weren't necessarily seeing as regularly, how we were managing the interface between children and their families when they couldn't be together, but also the fact that children weren't in school. So I think we learned huge amounts from the way that we delivered services in the pandemic. But equally, again, as we pulled out in the report, I think we've learned a lot about how we would continue to deliver our services. So we continue to use online mechanisms to engage children. We use online mechanisms to have meetings as well as continuing to deliver. So I think there's huge amounts of learning, and I would also suggest that we are so much more prepared for a pandemic than we were when we entered the pandemic, because of the experiences we've had that we then can take forward.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else, so thank you very much. As always, excellent report. Thank you. And I don't think you could have done much more, actually, because it was not like sort of, oh, in 3 months' time you're going to have a pandemic and think the world's going to change. It was, we were all fine one day and the next day we're not, and we've all had to learn to adjust. Right, so we now move on to item 12, which is the final item, and it's a presentation on the Leicestershire Music Service, which who's going to introduce it? Is it Alison? So I think this is exciting because it's come back into the department, hasn't it?
It has, yes.
Been
We're very pleased. So from January, we've had the music service come back over into Children and Family Service Department in part of my substantive role as Head of Education, Quality and Inclusion. I was very pleased to welcome the music service to be part of that brief, and it fits very neatly and great for myself then to go out into schools and without them knowing that the music service was part of my portfolio, to give me lots of positive feedback. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague who, using our ways of working electronically and online virtually, Sharon Jagdepal, is going to deliver this presentation around some of the work that the music service, not only themselves, but the children are doing. So I'll hand over to you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's lovely to be here. Hello, everybody. My name is Sharon Jagdepal, and I am the Deputy Service Manager for Leicestershire Music. For those watching this briefing with vision impairment or low vision, I will provide an audio description. I am an Asian female with short, dark hair. I am presenting from my home, and there is a white background displaying a number of partially visible pictures and a record player in the background. Leicestershire Music were delighted to join Children Family Services in January 2022, and this presentation will give you an overview of our work. The slide that you've got on the screen is our wonderful big band, and you're about to watch a video about this. The footage is from the big band's first concert that took place after COVID restrictions eased, and we were allowed to play together again. The concert was held at Wigston Academy, that's our Saturday centre, and was such a joyous occasion with full support of parents and Leicestershire Music staff. Our bands and orchestras have since performed at Holy Trinity Church, and we are gearing up for our end of year finale at De Montfort Hall this month, and more to follow on that later. Could we play the video, please? Thank you very much. I couldn't actually hear that where I am, but I could see the visual, so I hope that all came across really well. Little bit of background and context. So Leicestershire Music will be celebrating its 75th year in 2023, and we're currently planning lots of exciting activities to celebrate this. Please watch this space for more information. There's a rich tradition of musical excellence, and even though Leicestershire Music faced extraordinary challenges in light of the pandemic, our staff and young people have showed incredible resilience and determination. Resilience and determination in providing access to high quality music education, even throughout a longer lockdown than other parts of the country. Leicestershire Music is funded by the Arts Council England, and we work across the county as well as the city. We are guided and inspired by the following national plans. Let's Create, and that's by the Arts Council England. Music in Schools, What Hubs Must Do, and that's an Ofsted document. The Model Music Curriculum, that's published by the government in March 2021, and The Importance of Music, a National Plan for Music Education, and that's a publication by the DFE and DCMS. And there is a refreshed publication due out any day soon. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our vision and our audacious goal. Leicestershire Music has a really strong vision, which is enriching and connecting your world through life-changing musical experiences. Our key objectives are primarily about growth and increasing engagement with both schools and pupils across all activities. We ensure our offer to disadvantaged families and children is clearly communicated and understood, offering a clear pathway for involvement with Leicestershire Music activities for pupils aged 3 to 18. We are also working towards our big audacious goal, and by 2026 we will increase participation of young people from Leicester and Leicestershire in activities funded by Leicestershire Music to 20%, of which 25% should be from disadvantaged backgrounds. We are currently targeting a new approach in 2 pilot areas, Colville and Highfields, to inform our future work. This work aims to bring schools, parents and communities together to enrich the musical offer for our young people. Can I have the next slide, please? So our core and extension roles. So Leicestershire Music is funded by the Arts Council England, and we are required to deliver on the roles outlined by the National Plan for Music Education. These are to ensure that every child aged 5 to 18 has the opportunity to learn a musical instrument other than voice through whole class ensemble teaching programmes for ideally a year, but for a minimum of a term, and that has to be weekly tuition on the same instrument. We also provide opportunities to play in ensembles and to perform from an early stage. We ensure that clear progression routes are available and affordable to all young people. And we are developing a singing strategy to ensure that every pupil is singing regularly and that choirs and other vocal ensembles are available in the area. Next slide, please. Our extension roles are as follows. We're also required to carry out these as part of the Arts Council requirements. Then that is to offer continuous professional development to school staff, particularly in supporting schools to deliver music in the curriculum. We are to provide an instrument loan service with discounts or give free provision to those on low incomes. And we are to provide access to large-scale and high-quality music experiences for children working with professional musicians and venues. This will be seen later on this month at our summer festival, which takes place at De Montfort Hall. Next slide, please. Over the next years, the focus for Leicestershire Music includes COVID recovery, including the well-being of staff and our students. The recruitment of new teachers, and there's actually currently a national shortage of music teachers. Recruitment of new pupils to all Leicestershire music activities, and this has become even more challenging in light of the rising costs of living, where music is not a priority for some families, understandably. Leicestershire Music are national leaders in music technology, and we aim to continue to develop our offer and continue to share our work on a national level. Our primary school links are strong, and Leicestershire Music will continue to support this work with the primary scheme of work on offer that we currently have in place for our schools. We're developing a secondary music strategy to engage with more of our secondary schools, and we do currently have a small but strong secondary music network. And in terms of equalities, diversity and inclusion, Leicestershire Music are in a strong position with our decolonisation work, and we are implementing an EDI strategy to diversify our offer even further. A longer term focus for Leicestershire Music would be, well, we're quite homeless at the moment. We would love to find a venue where all of our music activity could take place in one purpose-built music centre. And that's obviously for the long term, because we've got to focus on regeneration and focusing on the well-being of our staff currently at the moment. The next slide is about our events. So since restrictions have eased, we have been able to plan an exciting series of events at Leicestershire Music. In a moment, you'll see a short video, which is all about our big end of term event. This is happening on June the 21st, the 22nd and the 23rd. And that's the Leicestershire Music Summer Festival at De Montfort Hall. This is a 3-day celebration of all the amazing work our pupils have done, and also to showcase all future opportunities available to our children and young people over the next academic year. Would you please play the video? Thank you very much. Thank you. So we do like to shout about the amazing work that our young people do. Please connect with us with Leicestershire Music on all social media platforms. We're also on LinkedIn, and we use our handle at Let's Make Music across all platforms. Thank you so much for listening.
Well, thank you, and thank you for everything that you're doing at Leicester Music. There we go. I think if we can arrange that part of the agenda is circulated to all councillors, because if they're not going to book the tickets, I'll be cross. Nobody wants me cross. Right. Mark, I know you wanted to come in.
I'll keep it very brief. As a former teacher of musical theatre, and I taught in musical theatre, I'm exceptionally passionate about music, and was terrified about where our talent was going to go, particularly after COVID. So I pledge my absolute unconditional support for anything I can do to move your projects forward. And I'm delighted that after 2 years of misery and moribund stories of loss, we've actually got something that's refreshingly exciting to look forward to, and the children were clearly engaged. So thank you for your hard work on that, and thank you for respecting the arts. It is the fabric that holds our country together. So well done. Thank you very much.
I concur with what my colleague has said, but I think also over the last 3 or 4 days, we've seen nationally and internationally what this country can do for the arts, for theatre, and who can forget Paddington Bear. But I think if you can make sure we all know about this and goes out in a bulletin, and we'll get the tickets booked ASAP. So, but thank you, and please pass on our thanks to everybody involved. It's been great and a lovely way to finish this meeting. Thank you. Jeff.
Quick question. You talked about venues. Do we still have the Herrick Centre, or is that long gone into the past?
I think that one's gone into the past, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yes, I think it has.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, just a quick question for myself as well. I don't have a musical theatre background, but I do have a YU Spotify account, so I don't know if that counts. You said one of your future aims is music technology. I was wondering if that included things like DJing. I visited a school recently, and one of the kids told me he wanted to be a DJ when he grows up, which I wasn't sure if that was a great career goal, but you never know. So obviously, you know, classical musical instruments great, but what about kind of DJing and stuff?
Absolutely, yes, we do. Our music technology teachers do have a turntablism unit, which is going into primary schools, where all children do learn how to use a turntable. And we are working to link the turntablist work with a classical orchestra as well. So watch this space to see music technology and classical music mixed together. We have a composer in with us who's writing music to suit the young people and to really integrate music technology and classical music.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And I would like to now say the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for the 6th of September. I have no urgent items. So thank you very much for today's meeting, and I declare the meeting closed. If you could arrange some sort of musical concert for us at every meeting, that would be fantastic. Staff choir or something. No, it's been great, but thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.